Hello, everyone. It's Charlene Lee, and today I'm going to be talking about the future of work. And I'm excited about this because in so many areas of my work, again, I've been a technology analyst now for over 20 years. People describe the future of work with all of these technologies, collaboration technologies. We've seen the rise of video conferencing over the past year with the pandemic. And while I love the technologies, I do think that the future of work is not defined by those technologies. And in many ways, it's something very different. It's really about the relationships that we have. And I'll be talking about that today and talking about how we can look at the future of work from a different perspective and defining the future of work today, right now, where we are, because of the types of relationships we want to have with each other in our workplace. So, to begin today, I would love for you to share what you think about the best job that you ever had. Describe it. Think about that best job, maybe the best day at work you ever experienced. And then share what was it about that job, that experience, that company that made it so great. I'm very curious to see what you all think about this. And especially if you listen to the stream later on, I would love to have you talk about that because it's part of my research that I'm looking at right now, which is to say, how do we think about our work? What do we love about it? What do we what do we aspire to have in our day-to-day jobs and the work and the relationships we have with each other? Because that's what keeps bringing us back to the work. It could be so many different things. So, a couple of the things that when I ask people in the past what they have found to be so great, one of the things that keeps coming up is that the work that I do is mission driven, that it has a strong purpose to it, that there's meaning behind it, that the work that I do is going to have an impact, that the things that I do every day when I come to my desk, when I sit down, start working with people, is that we were united by this common sense of purpose. Something else that I hear is that I feel like I can really be myself. I'm taking full advantage of all of my talents, all of my passions. That my coworkers, my managers, a boss, a company, I feel understands and sees me and helps me be the best person that I can be. That I aspire for excellence every day in the work that I do. And then the other thing that I hear from people is, that it's that I feel like the organization is honest, it's fair, that empowers people, that there is trust and integrity in the way that people work together. And that when I have that trust, I really feel like things are buzzing because that connection is so strong again to our purpose and to each other, but also that I know that everybody has my back, that I can trust and know that no one's gonna stab me in it. So I think these are some of the things that I've heard from, and I would love to hear from some of you of why you think work is so awesome. Carlos definitely is sharing the why is behind everything. I love Simon Sinek's the golden circle and the why, asking yourself, what is that why? That thought is just so important. So, what I'd like to do today is to go through, and again, please keep sharing what you think is the best part about the best job you ever had. What made it so amazing? What made it so great? So, what I want to talk about today is my key thesis that I started out with is that the future of work is going to be defined by our relationships. And we have seen this change just in the past 2 years as we've been going through this pandemic. Fundamentally, it really changed so much. It wasn't just about going to remote. It wasn't just the fact that uh, essential workers had to show up at work and work in a very different way. It changed the way that our relationships were with each other because we were no longer standing next to each other. We were remote. We really had to focus and say, what does our relationship look like? And we saw this change dramatically over the summer, especially here in the United States, with the rise of social justice and an awareness of racial injustice that managers started to do a simple thing. Between that and the pandemic, people just kept asking each other, how are you doing? And just that simple question, that simple query of asking, how are you doing, changed the fundamental relationship between people. when we took the time to set aside not just, focusing on the work, but also checking in with each other and to say our relationships matter, things shifted. And we saw employee engagement numbers start rising and peaking last June and July. And since then, we've gone back to doing work the regular way, not checking in as regularly. We see employee engagement now tailing back down again, still at a very higher level than historically, but going back down because we weren't checking in as much, didn't feel the need to. So the way I think about the future of work is very much through these relationships because how we think about our relationships we have today and how we want them to change into the future is going to fundamentally define the way that the future of work is going to be. And that relationship is fundamental because as we rethink how we want our relationships to be, we start thinking about different things like organizational structure. We start thinking about information sharing. Even the ways that we show up as leaders will fundamentally change. And then the technology then comes in because the technology then is going to provide that support, that scaffolding for these new ways of relationships, the new ways of being and working with each other to be sustained. So, this is the key thing that technology is incredibly powerful, but it's an enabler of the change we want to create, not the actual change you want to put in place. And I can say this having been, again, a technology analyst, somebody who's studied technology for over 20 years, that it has never been about the technology. And it has always been about the relationships. I've done quite a bit of research, and there's continues to be research that shows that collaboration platforms and technologies inside of companies could be revolutionary, but that the adoption rate, even when you put it in with the best of intentions, is still fairly low, 50 to 60%. People just don't use these tools because they're still clinging to an old way of the relationships and haven't really accepted the way that relationships will have to change if you accept the use of these collaboration technologies. So one of the things that I do want to talk about this is to give an example. Think about tools like going all the way back to SharePoint, right? To the intranets that we have, even with messaging and Teams or Slack that we have today. These really determine and redefine the way that people work with each other. So, a couple of things that get called into change and get challenged because of these new ways of relationships. I'll give a couple of these because they may also be ways that you can proactively think about how you want these relationships to change in the future. So, one example is thinking about power distance. So, power distance is the natural differences that occur when you are in layers of hierarchy. So, you can imagine somebody at the very top of the organization, there's a big difference in power between where they are and where somebody is at the front line. And historically, you just don't go up and down. I mean, that person is so far up the corporate ladder, I could never talk to them, right? I could talk to one layer up, maybe in extreme circumstances to two layers up, but that's about it. And in some cases, that power distance is intentional. We intentionally create distance so that we can maintain power, make sure that there's a little bit distance so that when we uh, send out the edicts for orders for change or doing things, that people will listen to them because they have no chance to disagree. I think about this as literally when you move into a leadership position, moving into an office, and that office has a door. And the question becomes, is that door open or shut? When we squeeze the power distance, when we remove that distance and allow people to connect with us, and this is what technology has done, it has, in many cases, removed that power distance. I can write to my CEO simply by email and a text message. I can go message them on the platforms that we have. I can write pieces and posts on my intranet. I can post on Slack. And I know that everyone, including my CEO and the company, is reading that potentially. That shrinks now the power distance, changes the fundamental relationships in an organization, and changes the way that we work with each other. And allows us leaders who are in positions of power to also be able to connect and listen to people in a completely different way. Technology enables that, but the leader has to be in the first place willing to give up that distance, to give up that power difference, and to allow a different type of relationship to enter into it. So you can see just from that simple little example, thinking about power distance, how power shifts inside an organization when you have more fluid communications. Do we want that power distance still to be maintained, or do we want it to shrink? What kind of relationship do we want between ourselves as leaders and the people who are working for us? That is what I mean by defining the future of work. What do we want work to look like? How these relationships will be managed, and how is power, information, decisions going to be held and shared? So I just give you a couple quick other examples that are similar to power distance. How is power actually developed? How is it held? How is it shared? Who has power and influence in the organization? Is it determined by that hierarchy where people sit in it? Is it determined by tenure, by expertise, by the importance of the project that you're working on? What is it? And understanding how power develops and also how it's acknowledged and shared in the organization is a key part of what this future of work will look like. And two other key things are information sharing and decision making. How widely is information going to be shared? What's going to be kept secret? What will be broadly held and understood? And then decisions, who will be involved? Who will have the ability to raise their hand and say, I want to be a part of this? Or is that determined by somebody up high? So these are all different states of being as leaders, as collaborators, as subordinates in the organization that will need to be redefined in the future of work. All right, so I'm going to take a quick look at these comments here. Let's see. I see Jay has a comment here. Let me see if I can show it. Here we go. Jay is saying there's a great article here, just putting out there that talks about how workers' wages are recovering. And I think that's a great example, again, of how the things are changing so quickly. The demand and changes in supply and change in labor is making it such that I'm assuming this is the same article I saw. Again, came out, I guess, so yesterday. Haven't seen the article yet, but I'm assuming it's saying that the wages have been going up and up, and partly because of the shortage of demand of people coming back to work. So thank you for sharing that. So Paul Krugman has a salient comment on the old way of relationships. See the link above. So thank you so much for sharing that. Dr. M has a comment here that I think the technology, high-tech industries, there's no technologies for communication. There's excellent commercial channel, vertical and horizontal information, especially in the aviation industry. So thank you for sharing that, Dr. M. And so I want to go on now and talk a little bit more about just what are the steps that you can take in order to create this new way of working. And in particular, I think about this as a new state of being, because we oftentimes think of work as doing. How are we going to do things? How are we going to get work done? How are we going to make sure that everybody is collaborating at the right levels and with each other in a smooth way? And I want to take a step back and say, how do we want to be? How do we want to show up? How will we feel in this new future of work? So my first step in encouraging you to think about this future is to take a moment, take a deep breath and say, what will it feel like? And then craft stories about those best days of work that you aspire to create for that future. And, describe it in vivid terms with stories, because I think stories really capture a snapshot of what that future work looks like. So here's some stories I encourage you to write. You're walking into work. What are you excited about? What are you looking forward to? What's going through your head? What's going through your heart as you walk to work? And when I walk to work, walk into work, it could be your office, it could be your home, it could be into a site that you're working at. But as you're beginning your work day, what are you excited about? What does a team meeting look like? How does it begin? Who's at that meeting? Who's speaking up? How many people speak up? Who is there in the room? Who's remote? Who is, and what are things that are being accomplished in that meeting? How are you celebrating different things and the rituals that you have of recognition? but also when you're saying goodbye to someone after long years of service. What are they saying in those moments of celebration, in those moments of ceremony? What are you sharing about that person? What are they sharing about their experiences? What are the words they use to describe what it has been like to work at the organization for the past few years? And then at the end of the week, when you're looking back on it as you're closing down your work for the week, how are you describing what you've accomplished, how you're feeling, and how you feel like you have how you have contributed to your work? What words come up? What feelings come up around that? And so that's how I feel that the future of work needs to be defined from these very human perspectives that really are meaningful to us and that describe the type of relationships we have in our work, how we contribute, how we are being in that space. The second step, then, after creating those visions, is to say, how do these visions for the future connect back today to our current purpose, mission, and values? This may be ways for us to lean into these existing elements, these wonderful ways that we have to describe the meaning of work, and to help them use those elements to describe that future. So, what element of our values apply to our future and are consistent with what we're doing today? How does our mission extend to this? How does our purpose really support this vision of the future? And if they don't, then this may be an opportunity to tweak them, maybe even revamp them. But I think going back to these existing anchors that we have today are extremely powerful ways to connect it today to the future. And then the third step I would say is to audit your beliefs. These are the unwritten things as opposed to your purpose, mission, and values. These are the ways that determine how we actually do work. So if you want to be a certain way in the future, how do our beliefs today, how are we believing today? How are they working? How are they helping support this vision for the future? But also, what are the beliefs that are limiting our potential for that future? Understanding the limiting beliefs of ourselves that we hold as individuals, but also as an organization, are incredibly powerful starting points to be able to say, well, what do we need to change today to make that future happen? And then the last couple pieces of parts here is to add then back the technology. This is when technology comes in after you've decided what that future is going to look like, what the beliefs are. The technology provides that structure, that scaffolding to enable new ways of thinking and being, and also change and limit those and minimize those limiting beliefs that you may have. And then make sure you're communicating this, as always, to your team, to everybody, that this is the way we want to be, that this is where we are today, and this is where we want to be. The future of work begins today. We're not going to wait for it to happen in the future. Um, let's see. I just want to share a comment from Jay. This is absolutely true. The pandemic, January 6th, the Afghanistan, these have all eroded our faith and power relationships. And I think one of the key things that is so important today is to think about how much more important, as Jay is saying, that we focus on relationships and secure the trust that is in there to make sure it's as strong as possible. We take it for granted all too often that it's going to be there, that we can rely on the past and not have to focus on the today and also on the tomorrow. If we want to create this incredible change for tomorrow, for the future, then we're going to have to make sure we take the steps today to ensure those relationships are as strong as possible. And then Dr. M also has a comment here that you have to be really committed to doing this change. The challenge is to maintain life balance, to attract people. And again, this is some of the latest research I've seen is that in the past, pay and salary was always really high. Security is at the very top now. Flexibility is second, and work-life balance is third, and salary pay is fourth. People are increasingly willing to trade salary for these three other things. So again, and I think Jay has a great point. We're having a great conversation here in the chat. Working people are reevaluating their purpose and their relationships to an elite whom they believe has failed them. And it shows again in the huge number of businesses that are being formed today. People are no longer saying, I'm satisfied working for somebody. I'm going to work for myself. I'm going to start companies. It is up 70% over the past year. And it shows no sign of slowing down. These are the licenses that people are registering for in terms of starting a new business. They get a business ID, employment ID. And that has just been going through the roof and has not stopped over the past year. So I just want to close out with a couple pitfalls that I often hear from people. Reasons, you can call them excuses, but for them it's really valid that keeps them from thinking about the future. And if you're thinking these things, I encourage you to take a moment and rethink about them. So the first one is, I'm not the boss. I can't create that future. I'm just a manager, a director, a VP. I've even heard CEOs say this. It's not my job to create that future. It's somebody else's job. And and frankly, it's your job as any leader, even as an individual contributor, to start thinking about that future. Because if you are clear about what you want a year down the line, 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, and you're clear about what that future can look like, you're going to do everything possible today to make that future happen. If you have no clear definition of the future that you want, then you will be absolutely stuck in the today. And so this is a key thing that when we think about the future of work, we think it's somewhere down the line and we don't have to think about it. That I'm just going to wait for the future to unfold. So if the first pitfall is it's not my job, the second pitfall is the future's over there. I'm here today. I can just work on today, right? No, you're going to design the future today. And the more you can think about that, the more it's going to become a reality for you because you'll be working on it. And it's such a compelling vision of the future that you want to create. The third thing is, really doing it once and assuming that it's done. And so, again, this has to do with the technology that I'm just gonna install it and then it's going to happen. I'm just gonna have to say this once and it's going to happen. You have to continually focus on building that future over and over again, reevaluating how that future is actually unfolding, readjust your plans, and then be able to continue on with those plans. And then the last thing here is assuming and that it's going to be about the tech, focusing on the tech and not on the people. I can't tell you how many times I've seen excellent deployments of beautiful collaboration in enterprise technologies inside of organizations to enable the future of work. And nobody uses it because they focus only on the wonderful hooks and making sure it's there. And yeah, they have the manuals and everything, but they haven't addressed the fundamental problem. How is this going to change work? And how are people in their relationships going to be affected by it? If I'm a leader and I see this new technology coming in and it's going to potentially take away a lot of my power, and I have no context, no framework in which to think about that, of course I'm not going to use it. So we need to be thinking about the future of work in a much more holistic way. And so let's see a couple other quick quotes here, and I just want to close out with a couple other comments here. Somebody is saying here, it's good to have a plan. It's very valuable to be adaptable. So exactly, I have a plan, but the plan is always open to interpretation and changes. I think that's a great point. And then this is another comment. It's all about the people. Tech is GIGO. I haven't heard this acronym before, but it's garbage in, garbage out. So if you're not incorporating people in from the very beginning, it's not going to work very well. And Dr. M has another comment. Where does leadership begin and end? And one of the things I really want to make clear, my philosophy about leadership is that, yeah, you could define it by having a title where you are in the hierarchies. I believe leadership is actually a state of mind. It's a mindset. And leaders are people who want to create change. And for that reason, if you see a change that can happen, in other words, if you see a vision for the future that you think is possible and you want to be a part of it, then you are a leader by simply creating the change where you are to make that happen. My favorite example of this is talking to a recruiter in the Navy. And I asked them, how do you recruit? How do you determine whether somebody's going to be a good fit for the Navy or not? And his answer was incredible. He said, "We look for leaders. We don't look for leadership positions. We look for people who have leadership potential and capacity." And that is they take on the responsibility. When they see that a job has to be done, a change has to be met, they will step into that role. So they ask for examples of that. When did you do something when nobody asked you to? And that is what I think is the epitome of leadership, is that you take on the responsibility. You have the agency to begin to create change. And it is the number one thing I'd say to people early in their careers: start making changes, step up and be the leader without having that title. Don't wait for that opportunity. All right. A couple other comments is I think we need to focus on learning to communicate effectively. Absolutely. I mean, that's such a wise, I'm just going to put that up again. I think that's such a wise point that if we want to communicate all of the different things that we want to have happen as leaders, then we have to focus on learning, both learning for everyone else that they're going to be learning about this new way of being, not just told what to do, but I think also focus on learning for ourselves. How are we going to learn and grow as leaders? Because I guarantee you, we as leaders don't have all the answers. And yet we think we have to act as if we do. And the sooner we can let go of this imposter, this cloak that is sitting there saying, like, you have to have all the answers. No, we have to have all the right. We have to be asking the right questions, leading people to say, where are we going? We want to go here. How do we get there? I have some ideas. How could we do this better? So thank you for that. Um, Great comments here. I'm just going to keep going here. Just a few more things here. Um, Transactional analysis is a great program for not only management leadership, but all employees. It's a big weakness. What I've learned many times is that work is not a democracy. It is top down. So this is an interesting point. I'm not familiar with transactional analysis, but I think the idea here is that if you only look at the things that are happening back and forth in terms of an organization, where are they actually happening? How is it being directed? Because if you are looking only at the transactions but not the relationships, then you're going to be missing a lot. And if leadership is traditionally always top down, that means that you're always waiting for somebody else to make the decisions for you versus looking around and seeing the organization, looking at your team, exactly where you are, and saying, how can we make that change happen? I think that the speed of change today is happening so quickly that the top down only way of leading and managing no longer works. We see this in the most hierarchical areas of our society, in the military, in that they understand that there is a hierarchy of order, there's a chain of command, but they also have fostered, especially in places like the army, when you're in a situation and you have eyes on the ground, those eyes on the ground have tremendous power and influence. So they can, in many cases, overturn an order coming from above because they know what's happening and they have full power to be able to do that. So this is I think a key fundamental change in how we have understood, and it's been enabled by one simple thing, that we can communicate with each other now. Top down was absolutely essential when communications, information flows were very difficult, very precious and hard to do. Right now, we have instantaneous abilities to communicate from the front lines all the way back up to the top and back down again. And so that has fundamentally changed the power dynamics as a result. Okay, let's see. We have a couple other things. If it isn't a fit, you can never force it. That is so awesome because if it's not a fit, if for whatever reason, it's not working, you can't force somebody to work in a new way. I'm often asked, how do we get a leader who doesn't want to work in this new way? How do we cajole them, convince them, give them incentives and rewards to go in this new way? I keep coming back to purpose, mission, and values. Are we aligned on this? Are we clear that this is where we want to do? Are we clear on the strategy? Do you buy into it? Because if they're not, then the fit isn't there, not because of personality or other characteristics, but because the fit into our purpose, where our bus is going, you can't get on this bus because you fundamentally do not agree with where we're going. But if they do agree with that, but they're just scared, they're reluctant, they're uncomfortable, then we can work with that if we understand that they believe in the purpose, mission, and values, the why of we are doing this. If they fundamentally believe that, then that's place where we can work with it. This is why I so encourage you to link your vision of the future back to your purpose, mission, and values. By connecting those two things together, you will bring along so much of the organization. All right. Let's see. I think that's it. Thank you so much for joining. We went a little bit over today, but as you can see, I'm really excited about this topic. I encourage you to continue adding to the comments in this thread. I love this topic so much, and I want to be able to learn as much from your experiences too. There was some great thinking today in the comments. Thank you so much, everybody, for sharing and contributing and having a conversation in this live stream. I do want to just tell you a little bit about the next session that we're going to have. It's going to be next Tuesday, August 31st, a week from today at 9 a.m. Pacific. And I'm very excited to welcome my good friend, Gary Bowles. He has been the chair of the Future of Work at Singularity for many, many years. He is a prolific writer and thinker about this and has been a fantastic collaborator with me. And he has a new book coming out. And I'm excited that he's going to come on his launch day to this live stream, and he's going to be talking about the new rules of work. I reviewed his book. It's absolutely fantastic. He talks about the mindsets, the tool sets, the different things that you need to be able to be successful in the new way of working. He has poured all of his knowledge and expertise into this book, and he'll be sharing it with us next week. So thank you so much for joining for today. And I encourage you to think about this future of work, share back into these comments. How do you think about what that future could potentially look like? And I wish you all the best in this week, actually making that future come to life. Thank you, and I'll see you next week.